In the sweltering heat of a late summer afternoon in 1992, in a sprawling colonial mansion on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, the air was thick with the scent of magnolias and something far more sinister: arsenic-laced gumbo simmering in a massive cast-iron pot. It was supposed to be the joyous wedding day of the estate's young heir, Thomas Hargrove, to his blushing bride Eliza, a union that promised to cement the family's legacy of old Southern wealth. But as guests in starched linen suits and flowing gowns gathered in the grand dining hall, laughter echoing off crystal chandeliers, no one noticed the subtle tremor in the hands of the cook, Etta Mae Johnson, as she ladled out the fateful portions. Etta Mae, a black woman in her late 40s, had served the Hargrove family for over 2 decades, her life a quiet chain of servitude hidden behind forced smiles and whispered prayers. That day, as the first spoonful touched lips and polite compliments flowed, a shadow of death began to creep into the celebration, invisible and inexorable. Imagine the horror unfolding in slow motion. The groom's mother, matriarch Lydia Hargrove, raising her glass in a toast, her voice dripping with entitlement, only for a sudden pallor to wash over her face moments later. The intrigue grips you. Why would a loyal servant, known for her unwavering devotion, turn the sacred rite of marriage into a chamber of slow poison? Fear coils in your gut as you realize this isn't just a tale of betrayal. It's a psychiatric unraveling, a mind fractured by years of unspoken torment where vengeance blooms from the soil of unimaginable cruelty. What hidden agonies drove Etta Mae to this act, poisoning not just the family but an entire gathering of oblivious kin and friends? Was it a psychotic break, a delusion of grandeur, or something far more chilling? A calculated psychosis born from systemic evil that masqueraded as tradition? This case peels back the layers of the human psyche, revealing how the fragility of morality can shatter under the weight of prolonged dehumanization. In the Hargrove household, power dynamics twisted minds like vines choking an ancient oak, showing us that anyone, master or servant, can descend into darkness when empathy is systematically starved. It forces us to confront our own vulnerabilities. How close are we to snapping when dignity is stripped away, layer by layer, until only rage remains? The unpredictability of the mind here isn't random. It's a mirror to society's blind spots, where justice often serves the powerful and buries the truth. Stay with me, because lurking beneath this poisoned feast is an unexpected twist, a psychiatric revelation so profound it redefines vengeance, exposing a secret that challenges everything we believe about sanity, guilt, and redemption. Questions burn. Did Etta Mae hear voices commanding her hand, or was her madness a mask for a deeper collective trauma? What psychiatric diagnosis unraveled in those final moments, and how did it evade detection for so long? These enigmas demand answers, pulling you deeper into the tunnel of terror. To connect with this harrowing journey, hit that like button right now. It ensures more souls uncover these buried psychiatric nightmares, shining light on the inexplicable shadows of the mind. And in the comments type, "I'm ready to discover the truth about this story." By doing so, you're not just engaging, you're forging bonds in our community of truth seekers, those brave enough to peer into the abyss where psychiatry meets monstrosity. We stand together, unraveling what society whispers but never shouts. Thank you for joining this quest. You're the vanguard of understanding the unutterable. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. As the wedding toast faded into uneasy murmurs, the first subtle signs of the poison's embrace began to manifest, not in screams or convulsions, but in a creeping malaise that draped the grand hall like an uninvited fog. Lydia Hargrove, the iron-willed matriarch whose word had ruled the estate since her husband's untimely death a decade prior, felt at first a metallic tang lingering on her tongue, dismissed at first as the richness of Etta Mae's famed roux. She complimented the cook publicly, her voice carrying the false warmth of patronage, unaware that each word sealed her fate. Around the long oak table, laden with silver platters of cornbread, collard greens and that deceptive gumbo, relatives and friends, cousins from Atlanta, business associates from Charleston savored the meal, their conversations weaving tales of Southern pride and future alliances forged in this very union. Thomas, the groom, beamed at Eliza, his hand clasping hers, oblivious to the toxin threading through his veins, a silent assassin born from the kitchen's heart. Etta May retreated to the shadows of the scullery, her apron stained with the evidence of her labor, watching through a cracked door as the family she had nurtured and been broken by ingested their doom. For 22 years since arriving as a young widow in 1970, she had been the invisible backbone of the Hargrove dynasty. Hired initially to care for the children after Lydia's neglect became scandalously apparent, Etta May's days blurred into nights of endless toil. Dawn risings to tend the herb garden, midnight bakings for surprise guests, and the constant mending of egos bruised by the family's petty tyrannies. Lydia, with her sharp tongue and sharper expectations, treated Etta May not as kin but as chattel, a relic of old hierarchies persisting into the modern era. Whispers among the staff spoke of slaps disguised as corrections, wages docked for imagined slights, and the cruelest cut, Lydia's refusal to allow Etta May time off for her own daughter's funeral in 1985, claiming the estate's needs superseded personal grief. This servitude wasn't mere employment. It was a psychological cage, forged in the fires of racial and class divides that the Hargroves cloaked in magnolia-scented civility. Etta May's mind, once vibrant with dreams of her own small cafe in the quarters of town, withered under the weight of isolation. She slept in a cramped attic room above the stables, its walls papered with faded news clippings of civil rights victories that mocked her reality. Lydia's husband, before his passing, had been no better. His leering gazes and jokes about her cooking spicing up his life left scars deeper than skin. Thomas, raised in this toxic soil, inherited the entitlement, treating Etta May as a fixture, once locking her in the pantry overnight as punishment for a perceived delay in supper during his college years. These acts, banal in their repetition, eroded her sense of self, planting seeds of resentment that festered in silence. Psychiatrically, this was the prelude to fracture, chronic stress manifesting as dissociative episodes, where Etta May would find herself staring blankly at the stove, hours lost in reverie. Neighbors in the nearby black community noticed her withdrawal, her once lively church attendance dwindling, replaced by solitary walks along the marshy riverbanks, murmuring to herself about debts unpaid. Yet no one intervened. The Hargroves' influence quashed rumors, their wealth-buying discretion from local authorities. As the wedding guests began to shift uncomfortably, complaints of nausea masked as overindulgence, Etta May's tremor returned, not from fear but from a burgeoning clarity, a voice within affirming that justice, long denied, was now simmering to perfection. The evening wore on, the string quartet playing oblivious waltzes as ambulances were summoned under the guise of food sickness. Lydia collapsed first, her body crumpling elegantly onto the Persian rug, her final gasp a bewildered accusation toward the kitchen. Panic rippled through the hall, guests clutching throats, the bride's veil askew in horror. Etta May emerged then, calm as a confessor, offering weak teas that only hastened the inevitable for some. Investigators later pieced together the arsenic source, rat poison from the garden shed, its bitter almond scent disguised by the gumbo's spices, administered in escalating doses over weeks to build tolerance in the family, except on this day, when the lethal concentration peaked. In the aftermath, as sirens wailed into the night, Etta May was led away in cuffs, her expression serene, almost beatific. Whispers of witchcraft swirled, but the true horror lay in the psychiatric autopsy of her mind. A delusion of righteous retribution, where years of suppressed trauma coalesced into a god complex, positioning her as the avenger of ancestral wrongs. The wedding day's vengeance wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of a psyche unraveling thread by thread, each humiliation a knot tightening toward explosion. As dawn broke over the poisoned estate, the surviving guests grappled with survivor's guilt, unaware that Etta May's confession would unveil layers of family secrets, affairs, abuses, and a hidden lineage that made her act not madness, but a mirror to their own monstrosities. The investigation deepened, revealing Etta May's journals, cryptic entries blending recipes with ravings about the family curse, hinting at a hereditary mental affliction in the Hargroves themselves, passed down like tainted heirlooms. Psychiatrists puzzled over her lack of remorse, her insistence that the poison was medicine for the soul, suggesting a dissociative identity forged in servitude's forge. As she sat in interrogation, her eyes locked on detectives with unnerving clarity, recounting not just the act, but the decades of degradations that birthed it. Lydia's taunts about Etta Mae's place, the denial of education for her late children, the sabotage of her attempts to leave. This wasn't mere poisoning. It was a psychiatric rebellion, a mind-reclaiming agency through annihilation. The community's shockwaves rippled outward, old wounds of the South's racial underbelly reopening. Etta Mae's trial loomed, but beneath the legal facade lay the enigma. Was her vengeance a psychotic delusion, or a sane response to insanity-inducing oppression? The blocks of her story built inexorably toward revelation, each layer exposing how the human mind, cornered, can architect its own apocalypse. In the dim glow of a single bulb in the Savannah Police Station's interrogation room, hours after the chaos at the Hargrove estate had subsided into a hush of mourning and accusation, Etta Mae Johnson sat composed, her wrists shackled to the table, yet her posture radiating an unsettling poise. The detectives, seasoned men hardened by the city's undercurrents of crime, exchanged glances as they entered, files bulging with preliminary reports of arsenic traces in the gumbo, and witness statements painting a picture of sudden, inexplicable illness sweeping the wedding party. Etta Mae's eyes, dark pools reflecting no regret, met theirs with a steady gaze as if she had been waiting for this moment not with dread, but with a quiet anticipation. The air hung heavy with the scent of stale coffee and desperation, but she spoke first. Her voice a soft southern drawl laced with something ethereal. "I've been cooking for them souls longer than y'all been chasing shadows. Now the meal's done and the reckoning's here." As the tape recorder whirred to life, Etta Mae began her confession, not in bursts of hysteria, but in measured revelations that wove a tapestry of psychological torment, spanning generations. She recounted her arrival at the Hargrove mansion in 1970, drawn by an ad in the local paper for a live-in cook, promising steady pay and a roof over her head after her husband's tragic mill accident left her destitute. What she found was a labyrinth of emotional manipulations, where Lydia Hargrove ruled with an invisible whip of condescension and control. Etta Mae described nights when Lydia would summon her at odd hours to prepare elixirs for imagined ailments, berating her for the slightest imperfection, all while confiding twisted family secrets that burdened Etta Mae like chains. One such secret: Lydia's own mother had suffered from what the family called the vapors, a euphemism for manic episodes that led to erratic behaviors, including locking servants in cellars during fits of paranoia. Etta Mae, absorbing these tales, began to see patterns, echoes of madness rippling through the Hargrove bloodline, manifesting in Thomas's impulsive rages and Eliza's fragile nerves, which the family dismissed as bridal jitters. The detectives probed deeper, uncovering through her words a psychiatric dissent that had been simmering unseen. Etta Mae admitted to the journals hidden in her attic room, leather-bound volumes she had salvaged from a thrift shop, filling them with entries that blurred the line between reality and delusion. Pages detailed vivid dreams where ancestral spirits visited her, whispering of injustices from the plantation era, urging her to balance the scales. These weren't mere fantasies. Psychiatrists later analyzed them as hallucinatory experiences, possibly triggered by chronic sleep deprivation and emotional abuse. Etta Mae spoke of hearing Lydia's voice in her head long after the matriarch had retired for the night, commanding impossible tasks that left her exhausted and questioning her sanity. One entry, dated months before the wedding, described a vision of the Hargrove family as parasitic vines choking her life force, compelling her to seek purification through the garden's poisons, a metaphor that evolved into literal action. As the interrogation unfolded, Etta Mae revealed the meticulous planning behind the vengeance, a process that exposed the fragility of her mind's architecture. She had started with small doses in the family's daily meals, building their tolerance while testing her resolve, each addition a step deeper into dissociation. Psychologically, this was a coping mechanism gone awry, compartmentalizing her rage into a separate avenger persona, allowing her to maintain the facade of loyalty by day. Detectives noted her detachment as she described watching Thomas propose to Eliza over a poisoned brunch, her internal voice celebrating the slow erosion of their vitality. The wedding day escalation, she explained, was timed to coincide with the anniversary of her daughter's death, a loss Lydia had callously ignored, forcing Etta Mae to grieve alone while catering a garden party. This convergence ignited a psychotic fusion, where grief and grudge became indistinguishable, propelling her to lace the gumbo with a fatal measure. The room grew tense as Etta May delved into the family's hidden hypocrisies, unraveling threads that suggested the Hargroves' own mental instabilities had infected her psyche like a contagion. Lydia's late husband, she claimed, had confided in drunken stupors about his father's institutionalization for schizophrenia, a secret buried to preserve the family's reputation. Etta May absorbed these revelations, her mind twisting them into a narrative where she was the chosen vessel to expose and eradicate the curse. Psychiatrists consulting on the case identified this as projective identification, where Etta May externalized her traumas onto the family, blurring victim and perpetrator. Her confession painted vivid scenes of solitary rituals in the kitchen, mixing herbs while chanting forgotten hymns, behaviors indicative of a schizoaffective disorder exacerbated by isolation. Outside the station, the community buzzed with speculation, old-timers recalling Etta May's withdrawn demeanor at market stalls, her purchases of rat poison dismissed as routine for the estate's rodent issues. Yet as details leaked, a collective unease settled. How had this psychiatric unraveling escaped notice in a household of privilege? Etta May's words hinted at complicity, the family's willful blindness to her deteriorating state, preferring her as a silent servant over a human in need. One detective, moved by her poise, asked why she hadn't sought help. Her response chilled the room. "Help don't come for folks like me. The mind breaks quiet like, and only the ghosts listen." This admission opened floodgates to further psychiatric evaluation, revealing layers of post-traumatic stress intertwined with delusional grandeur. As the session stretched into dawn, Etta May's narrative circled back to the wedding's poisoned feast, describing the satisfaction in seeing Lydia's empire crumble from within. The detectives, piecing together evidence, realized her act wasn't isolated madness but a symphony of suppressed voices, her own, her ancestors', and perhaps the Hargroves' buried afflictions, clashing in a crescendo of retribution. The journals retrieved from the attic corroborated her tale, their pages a psychiatric roadmap of descent, each entry a breadcrumb leading to the inevitable. In this revelation, the true disturbance emerged, a mind not inherently monstrous, but molded by relentless erosion, where vengeance became the only salve for a soul long denied. With the attic journals now spread across the cluttered desk of Dr. Harlan Reeves, a forensic psychiatrist appointed by the state to evaluate Etta May Johnson's competency for trial, the pages seemed to pulse with a life of their own under the harsh fluorescent lights of his Savannah office. It was early 1993, months after the poisoned wedding feast had claimed 7 lives, including Lydia and Thomas Hargrove, and left a dozen survivors scarred by lingering ailments and nightmares. Dr. Reeves, a man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a penchant for unraveling the mind's labyrinths, flipped through the entries, his brow furrowing at the elegant script that devolved over time into frantic scrawls. Etta May's words leaped out. "The vines grow thick in their blood, twisting round my own. I am the gardener now pruning the rot." These weren't just metaphors. They hinted at a delusional framework, where Etta May perceived herself as intertwined with the Hargrove lineage, a psychiatric fusion born from decades of proximity and pain. As Dr. Reeves delved deeper, interviewing Etta May in the sterile confines of the county jail's evaluation room, her demeanor remained eerily composed, a stark contrast to the chaos her actions had wrought. She spoke of the journals as her silent witnesses, chronicling not only her grievances but also observations of the family's own unraveling psyches. Lydia, she claimed, had exhibited signs of narcissistic personality disorder, her demands escalating into paranoid accusations, once barricading the kitchen door, convinced Etta May was stealing silverware to fund a rebellion. Thomas, the groom whose life ebbed away mid-vows, had confided in Etta May during late-night kitchen confessions about his bouts of depression, masked by bravado, where he heard echoes of his grandfather's rants about family curses. Eliza, the surviving bride, now widowed and withdrawn, had shared whispers of her own anxiety, fearing the Hargrove name carried a hereditary taint that doomed unions. The psychiatrist's sessions uncovered layers of transgenerational trauma, where Etta May's mind had absorbed the family's dysfunctions like a sponge, refracting them through her own lens of oppression. In one poignant exchange, Etta May described a recurring hallucination, spectral figures of enslaved ancestors gathering at the estate's old oak tree, their chains clinking as they nodded approval to her plans. Dr. Reeves diagnosed this as schizotypal features, amplified by post-traumatic stress from her servitude, where isolation bred magical thinking as a survival mechanism. Yet, Etta May countered with lucidity. Ain't madness if it's truth dressed in shadows. Their blood poisoned mine long 'fore I returned the favor. This push-pull between delusion and insight fascinated Reeves, suggesting a borderline personality organization, where vengeance served as a maladaptive anchor to reality. As evaluations progressed, leaks from the sessions stirred the community, with local papers sensationalizing Etta May as a voodoo priestess of vengeance, though she dismissed such notions with a wry smile, attributing her knowledge of poisons to practical estate needs rather than mysticism. Survivors, including Eliza, were subpoenaed for psychiatric assessments, revealing their own cracks. Eliza's dissociative fugues, where she wandered the mansion halls calling for Thomas, and cousins admitting to suppressed memories of Lydia's tyrannical episodes. One relative, a distant aunt, confessed under hypnosis to witnessing Lydia's mother institutionalize a sibling for fits, a family secret echoing through generations. Dr. Reeves theorized a genetic predisposition to mood disorders in the Hargroves, possibly bipolar spectrum, which Etta May had internalized as a curse to rationalize her act. The courtroom loomed, but pretrial motions focused on Etta May's mental state, with defense attorneys arguing insanity based on Reeves's report. Prosecutors countered with evidence of premeditation, the gradual arsenic buildup documented in autopsy reports showing Etta May's calculated escalation. In jail, Etta May underwent therapy, her sessions revealing deeper fissures, childhood losses, including an abusive father who mirrored Lydia's control, planting seeds of learned helplessness that flowered into defiant psychosis. She spoke of the wedding day as a liberation ritual, where poisoning the gumbo felt like shedding shackles, each ladle a step toward reclaiming her narrative. Psychiatrically, this was grandiosity masking profound despair, a mind reconstructing itself through destruction. Community ripples extended beyond Savannah, with civil rights groups rallying for Etta May, viewing her case as emblematic of lingering racial inequities, while Hargrove sympathizers decried her as a monster. Dr. Reeves, in his final report, painted a nuanced portrait. Etta May's vengeance stemmed from a complex interplay of environmental stressors and possible undiagnosed schizoaffective disorder, where auditory hallucinations, voices of the forgotten, commanded her hand. Yet he noted her intact cognition, her ability to recount events with precision, blurring the line between pathology and protest. As the trial date approached, Etta May requested her journals be read aloud in court, insisting they held the key to understanding not just her mind, but the collective psychosis of a society that allowed such fractures to fester. In quiet moments, Etta May reflected on the survivors' letters, some accusatory, others oddly empathetic, one from Eliza admitting shared suffering under Lydia's reign. This correspondence hinted at a psychiatric contagion, where the family's dysfunction had spread like ripples in a poisoned well, affecting all who drank from it. Dr. Reeves pondered the ethics. Was Etta May a victim of circumstance, her mind warped by proximity to madness, or an architect of her own delusion? The journal's final entries, scrawled on the eve of the wedding, prophesied redemption through ruin, a chilling foresight that left Reeves questioning the boundaries of sanity in a world rife with unspoken evils. As spring thawed the Georgia soil, the case evolved into a mirror for broader psychiatric inquiries, challenging experts to consider how systemic oppression could induce folie à plusieurs, a shared delusion among oppressed and oppressor alike. Etta May from her cell seemed at peace, her vengeance not an end, but a catalyst exposing the inherited madness that bound them all. As the Georgia spring blossomed into a humid summer in 1993, the Savannah courthouse became a theater of fractured psyches, where Etta May Johnson's trial unfolded like a slow unraveling of knotted threads, each testimony pulling tighter on the veil of inherited madness that had ensnared both accuser and accused. The courtroom, with its polished walnut benches and ceiling fans whirring lazily overhead, hummed with anticipation as jurors, a mix of locals from varied walks, Some, bearing the weight of their own unspoken histories, took their seats. Etta May, escorted in wearing a simple gray dress that hung loosely on her frame, met the gaze of the assembled with that same unnerving serenity, her eyes scanning the room as if cataloging souls rather than faces. Dr. Harlan Reeves, fresh from his evaluations, was called as the first expert witness, his report clutched like a talisman against the storm of scrutiny. He spoke in measured tones about folie à plusieurs, that rare psychiatric phenomenon where delusions spread like whispers in a crowded room, binding Etta May and the Hargroves in a web of shared distortion. Her vengeance not a solitary act, but a reflection of the family's own suppressed fractures. The prosecution painted Etta May as a calculated manipulator, her journals evidence of premeditated malice rather than madness, citing entries where she detailed the arsenic's effects with clinical detachment. Yet, as Reeves testified, these writings revealed a mind splintered by years of absorbed trauma, where the Hargroves' narcissistic echoes had morphed into her auditory commands, urging purification through poison. He described her dissociation as a protective shroud, allowing her to endure Lydia's daily degradations, endless critiques of her seasoning, accusations of laziness during her bouts of exhaustion, by retreating into an inner world where she reigned as arbiter of justice. The jury leaned forward as Reeves recounted a session where Etta May had mimicked Lydia's voice, her tone shifting seamlessly, illustrating how the matriarch's criticisms had embedded like shards in her psyche, fostering a persecutory delusion that blurred oppressor and self. Eliza Hargrove, the widowed bride, took the stand next, her voice trembling like leaves in a gathering storm, her once vibrant features now etched with shadows of grief and guilt. She spoke of the wedding day's haze, the gumbo's warmth turning to a chilling numbness in her limbs, but more profoundly, of the family's undercurrents that Etta May had navigated for decades. Eliza admitted to overhearing Lydia's tirades, dismissing them as tough love, yet now recognizing them as harbingers of deeper instability. In therapy post-tragedy, Eliza had uncovered her own anxiety disorder, rooted in childhood exposures to Lydia's mood swings, episodes where the matriarch would isolate herself for days, emerging with wild accusations. Etta May, listening from the defense table, nodded subtly, as if Eliza's words validated her journal's prophecies of a tainted vine strangling the household. This testimony stirred murmurs among spectators, hinting that the poisoning was less an isolated psychosis and more a culmination of collective denial, where Etta May's mind had become the scapegoat for generational afflictions. Defense attorneys seized on this, calling former staff who painted the Hargrove mansion as a pressure cooker of emotional volatility. A gardener, retired and hesitant, described Lydia's paranoid rituals, checking locks obsessively. Convinced servants plotted against her, behaviors Etta May had documented as the curse awakening. Another witness, a cousin who survived the feast with mild symptoms, confessed to family lore of an ancestor committed to an asylum in the 1920s for hallucinations, a secret Lydia guarded fiercely to preserve social standing. These revelations wove a narrative of inherited vulnerability, suggesting Etta May's exposure had induced a mirrored pathology, her vengeance a desperate bid to sever the cycle. Psychiatrically, Reeves explained, this mirrored folie imposée, where the dominant personalities, Lydia and Thomas, imposed their distortions onto the vulnerable, like Etta May, whose resilience cracked under the strain. As days blurred into weeks, Etta May's own testimony emerged as the trial's pivotal enigma, her words flowing with a poetic cadence that captivated and disturbed. She described the attic as her sanctuary, where whispers from the journals evolved into dialogues with unseen presences. Ancestors, she claimed, who revealed the Hargroves' lineage as one of exploiters, their wealth built on forgotten labors. These hallucinations, Reeves later analyzed, stemmed from cultural trauma, amplified by her isolation, transforming personal grievances into a mythic quest. Etta May spoke of the wedding planning as a farce, Lydia's insistence on perfection masking her own unraveling, frequent forgetfulness, misplaced rages, that Etta May interpreted as signs to act. The jury, diverse in background, grappled with empathy. One black juror later admitted feeling a kinship with Etta May's silenced voice, while others pondered the psychiatric implications of systemic pressures. Prosecutors countered with toxicologists, detailing the arsenic's path, but the defense reframed it as symptomatic of Etta May's delusional state. where poison became elixir of truth. Survivor accounts added layers. A business associate recalled Thomas's pre-wedding confessions of dread, hinting at depressive inheritance, while Eliza revealed letters from Lydia, admitting to dark thoughts in her youth. These disclosures exposed the family's facade, suggesting Etta Mae's act had lanced a boil of buried madness, forcing confrontations long avoided. In cross-examinations, Etta Mae's lucidity shone, recalling dates, conversations with precision, yet interspersed with cryptic references to the vines withering, indicating ongoing dissociation. The trial's atmosphere thickened with tension, reporters scribbling furiously as experts debated diagnostic boundaries. Was Etta Mae's condition reactive psychosis, triggered by abuse, or schizoaffective rooted in biology? Reeves advocated for the former, citing her lack of prior history, her mind a canvas painted by the Hargroves' dysfunctions. Community forums buzzed outside, with vigils for victims clashing with discussions on racial healing. Etta Mae's case a lens for examining how oppression fosters psychiatric echoes. As closing arguments neared, Etta Mae requested a private session with Eliza. Their whispered exchange, later revealed as mutual forgiveness, hinting at healing amid horror. In the trial's waning days, unexpected evidence surfaced, a hidden Hargrove diary unearthed from the estate, corroborating Etta Mae's claims of Lydia's instability, entries lamenting voices in the walls. This bombshell shifted perceptions, portraying Etta Mae less as monster and more as mirror, her vengeance a distorted reflection of the madness she endured. The jury retired to deliberate, the courthouse echoing with the weight of unresolved questions, each testimony a step deeper into the psyche's shadows. In the sweltering confines of the Savannah courthouse, as autumn leaves began to carpet the grounds outside in late 1993, the jury's deliberation chamber echoed with hushed debates that mirrored the fractured psyches laid bare during Etta Mae Johnson's trial. The 12 jurors, sequestered behind oak-paneled walls, pored over exhibits, the attic journals with their spiraling script, Dr. Reeves's psychiatric report charting the contours of shared delusions, and faded photographs of the Hargrove estate, its grandeur now tainted by tragedy. Hours stretched into days, the air thick with the scent of coffee and unresolved tension, as they grappled with the enigma of Etta Mae's mind. Was her act a deliberate strike against oppression, or the inevitable eruption of a psyche warped by the very madness she sought to purge? One juror, a retired teacher with roots in the city's black community, voiced the collective unease. It's like looking into a mirror cracked by time. Whose reflection do we trust? The verdict, when announced, fell like a muffled thunderclap in the packed courtroom, spectators holding breath as the foreman rose. Not guilty by reason of insanity, the words rang out, sending ripples of shock and murmurs through the assembly. Etta Mae, standing with hands clasped before her, showed no outward reaction, her eyes distant as if communing with those spectral ancestors from her hallucinations. The judge, a stern figure with a reputation for fairness, nodded solemnly, ordering her commitment to the state psychiatric hospital for treatment and evaluation. Prosecutors, faces etched with disappointment, argued for a retrial, citing the premeditation evident in the arsenic dosing, but the defense celebrated quietly, viewing the outcome as a rare acknowledgement of systemic influences on mental health. Eliza Hargrove, seated in the back row, wept silently, her tears a blend of relief and lingering sorrow, later confiding to reporters that the verdict felt like unearthing a family grave long overgrown. Commitment to the Georgia Regional Hospital brought Etta Mae into a new labyrinth of white-tiled halls and echoing corridors, where fluorescent lights buzzed like persistent doubts. Under the care of Dr. Amelia Cortez, a young psychiatrist specializing in trauma-informed therapy, Etta Mae's sessions began with tentative explorations of her inner world. Dr. Cortez, with her gentle demeanor and notebook ever at hand, encouraged Etta Mae to revisit the journals, not as evidence of guilt, but as maps to healing. In these dialogues, Etta Mae revealed deeper strata of her delusion. The vines symbolized not just the Hargroves' lineage, but her own entangled heritage, stories of her grandmother's life on similar estates, whispers of resilience passed down like heirlooms. Psychiatrically, this was complex PTSD interwoven with delusional disorder, where years of microaggressions had fostered a narrative of cosmic justice, her poisoning a ritual to reclaim agency lost to subservience. As months unfolded, Etta Mae's therapy unveiled subtle shifts. The auditory hallucinations softened from commanding voices to faint echoes, medicated with antipsychotics that dulled the edges without erasing the memories. Group sessions with other patients, women bearing scars of similar oppressions, fostered unexpected bonds, their shared stories illuminating how societal pressures could distort the mind's architecture. One peer, a former domestic worker, mirrored Etta Mae's experiences, her own breakdown manifesting in compulsive rituals rather than retribution. Dr. Cortez noted progress. Etta Mae's dissociation lessened, allowing glimpses of remorse not for the act itself, but for the collateral pain inflicted on innocents like Eliza. Yet shadows lingered. Nightmares of the wedding feast recurred, Lydia's accusatory gaze haunting her sleep, prompting explorations of guilt as a bridge to integration. Outside the hospital walls, the case sparked broader dialogues with academic papers citing it as a paradigm of environmental psychosis, where chronic stress from racial and class dynamics induced symptoms mimicking hereditary disorders. Civil rights advocates used Etta Mae's story to push for reforms in domestic labor laws, highlighting how isolation bred vulnerability. The Hargrove estate, now shuttered and overgrown, became a symbol in local lore, tourists whispering of ghosts as vines, real ones crept over its facade. Eliza, inheriting the remnants, began her own therapy, confronting the family's buried instabilities, commissioning genetic tests that revealed markers for bipolar disorder in the lineage, validating Etta Mae's curse as partial truth. In letters exchanged through Dr. Cortez, Eliza and Etta Mae forged a tentative correspondence, each woman's words a thread mending the rift, Eliza admitting the poisoning had forced her to see the household's toxicities she once ignored. Dr. Cortez's reports to the court detailed Etta Mae's evolving insight, her mind piecing together fragments like a mosaic, recognizing the arsenic as a desperate symbol rather than salvation. Yet challenges persisted. Withdrawal from medications triggered relapses, voices urging vigilance against new vines in the hospital staff, testing the boundaries of her recovery. Community outreach programs invited Etta Mae to share anonymized excerpts from her journals and workshops, transforming her narrative into a tool for empathy, attendees grappling with how everyday dismissals could accumulate into psychiatric crises. One session, attended by former Hargrove associates, ended in tearful acknowledgments, the room heavy with the weight of unspoken complicities. As years edged toward the millennium, Etta Mae's commitment review approached, psychiatrists debating her readiness for supervised release. Dr. Cortez advocated cautiously, citing sustained remission, but warning of triggers in familiar environments. Etta Mae, in reflective moments, spoke of redemption not as absolution, but as understanding, the mind's capacity to heal when afforded the dignity long denied. The case, now a footnote in psychiatric textbooks, continued to probe deeper questions. How does one disentangle personal pathology from societal ills? In quiet evenings, Etta Mae gazed from her window at the hospital grounds, the setting sun casting long shadows, pondering the veils that still shrouded her sanity's full restoration. As the calendar flipped into the early 2000s, with Y2K fears fading into distant memory and Savannah's streets buzzing with the promise of a new millennium, Etta Mae Johnson's commitment review at the Georgia Regional Hospital loomed like a crossroads in a fog-shrouded path, where paths of redemption and relapse intertwined. Dr. Amelia Cortez, her notes thickened by years of sessions, presented a comprehensive dossier to the review board, a panel of psychiatrists, legal experts, and state officials seated in a conference room overlooking the hospital's manicured lawns. Etta Mae, now in her late 50s, her hair streaked with silver that mirrored the subtle wisdom etched into her features, sat across from them, her hands folded calmly in her lap, no longer trembling but steady with the quiet resolve forged in therapy's crucible. The board's questions probed gently yet incisively, seeking signs of lingering delusion amid her professed insights. As Dr. Cortez advocated for supervised release, citing sustained remission and Etta Mae's active participation in restorative programs that had transformed her from isolated patient to mentor for others navigating similar psychic storms. The review delved into the nuances of Etta Mae's progress, her mind's landscape now mapped with greater clarity through ongoing assessments. She spoke openly of the vines as metaphors she had outgrown, recognizing them as projections of her traumas rather than literal curses, a shift indicative of cognitive restructuring. Yet the board noted vulnerabilities, occasional dissociative lapses during stress, where echoes of Lydia's voice resurfaced like faint radio static, prompting Dr. Cortez to recommend continued medication and outpatient monitoring. Etta May described her hospital years as a second servitude, but one of growth, where group therapies unveiled shared narratives, women recounting bosses who eroded their senses of self, their breakdowns manifesting in quieter desperations. One such peer's story of compulsive hoarding as a shield against loss resonated deeply, helping Etta May contextualize her poisoning as a maladaptive crescendo rather than destiny. Psychiatrically, this was integration at work, her schizoaffective symptoms subdued, allowing empathy to bloom where resentment once rooted. Approval for release came with conditions: residency in a halfway house on Savannah's outskirts, weekly therapy and community service, ironically, teaching cooking classes at a local center for underserved families, a role that reframed her skills from weapon to welfare. Etta May's first steps outside the hospital gates were tentative, the air heavy with jasmine and freedom's unfamiliar weight, her mind a tapestry of caution and curiosity. Settling into the modest house shared with others in recovery, she navigated daily rhythms that tested her stability: grocery shopping where spices evoked memories of the gumbo, or chance encounters with Hargrove acquaintances who averted eyes in silent judgment. Dr. Cortez's sessions now occurred in a cozy office downtown, focusing on reintegration triggers, social isolation's pull, or the media's occasional revisits to her case, framing her as a cautionary tale in documentaries on psychiatric justice. In this new chapter, Etta May's correspondence with Eliza Hargrove deepened, evolving from guarded letters to occasional meetings at neutral cafes, where they dissected the past like archaeologists unearthing relics. Eliza, having sold the estate and channeled proceeds into mental health advocacy, shared her own battles. Therapy revealing borderline traits inherited from Lydia, manifesting in relational instabilities that echoed the family's dysfunctions. Their dialogues uncovered mutual healings, Eliza forgiving Etta May as a proxy for her mother's unacknowledged cruelties, while Etta May found solace in Eliza's acknowledgement of the servitude's toll. Psychologically, this was reparative justice, mending psychic wounds through relational repair. Etta May's mind finding anchors in empathy that quelled delusional remnants. Yet disturbances lingered, a nightmare sequence where poisoned feasts replayed in endless loops, analyzed in therapy as residual PTSD, prompting mindfulness exercises to ground her in the present. Community integration brought unforeseen challenges. As Etta May volunteered at a shelter, her cooking nurturing rather than harming, but whispers from residents curious about her notoriety stirred internal voices questioning her worth. Dr. Cortez identified this as imposter syndrome intertwined with her diagnosis, prescribing journaling anew, not as delusions diary but as affirmations archive. Entries now chronicled small victories, a student's smile over a perfected recipe, or a quiet evening walk where ancestral whispers felt like gentle guidance rather than commands. The halfway house dynamics mirrored a micro-society, with roommates sharing stories of manic episodes or depressive abysses, fostering a collective resilience that buffered Etta May's vulnerabilities. One incident, a heated argument over chores, tested her. Dissociation threatened, but she employed coping strategies, breathing techniques, reality checks, averting relapse, a testament to therapy's efficacy. As 2002 dawned, Etta May's case drew academic interest, with Dr. Cortez co-authoring a paper on transgenerational trauma's psychiatric echoes, using anonymized details to illustrate how oppression's legacy could induce shared psychoses. Invitations to speak at conferences came, but Etta May declined, preferring anonymity's cloak, her mind wary of spotlight's distortions. Instead, she mentored privately, guiding a young woman through similar dissociative fogs, her empathy a bridge built from her own crossings. Eliza's involvement grew, founding a support group where survivors of domestic inequities convened. Etta May attending incognito at first, then openly, her presence a symbol of transformation. These interactions revealed lingering enigmas, fleeting hallucinations during stress, analyzed as vestiges of her condition, managed through adjusted therapies. The passage of time softened edges, but not without ripples. A local news revisit on the anniversary stirred public curiosity, prompting Etta May to confront media portrayals that reduced her to Mad Avenger. In sessions, she processed this as external projection, mirroring her internal battles, strengthening her resolve. Friendships blossomed. A neighbor sharing gardening tips, evoking the estate's shed without poison's taint, anchoring her in normalcy. Psychiatrically, Dr. Cortez noted full remission's horizon, yet cautioned eternal vigilance, the mind's fragility a constant companion. Etta May, reflecting in solitude, pondered the threads connecting her release to broader healings, the veils of sanity lifting gradually, revealing not monsters, but humans entwined in mutual mending. In the humid embrace of a Savannah summer in 2005, 3 years into her supervised freedom, Etta May Johnson's life had woven itself into the fabric of quiet reinvention, her days a deliberate tapestry of routine and reflection that masked the undercurrents of a psyche still navigating uncharted depths. The halfway house had given way to a modest rental cottage on the city's fringes, its walls adorned with framed certificates from her cooking classes at the community center, testaments to a skill set redeemed from infamy. Mornings began with the rhythmic chop of vegetables, her hands steady as she prepared meals for eager students, many from backgrounds echoing her own, their eyes lighting with discovery rather than dread. Dr. Amelia Cortez's bi-weekly sessions had evolved into monthly check-ins, focusing on sustaining the delicate equilibrium of her mental landscape, where the vines of delusion now appeared only in dreams. Diluted echoes analyzed as subconscious processing rather than harbingers of relapse. Yet, reckoning arrived unbidden in the form of a national true crime podcast, Southern Shadows, which devoted an episode to the slave cook's vengeance, sensationalizing Etta May's story with dramatized reenactments and interviews from surviving Hargrove kin. The broadcast, airing to millions, unearthed fresh wounds, anonymous callers speculating on her inherent darkness, rooted in racial stereotypes that clawed at her hard-won stability. Etta May, tuning in by chance during a sleepless night, felt the old dissociation stir, a fleeting sense of unreality, as if watching herself from afar, the podcaster's voice morphing into Lydia's scolding timbre. In the subsequent therapy session, Dr. Cortez unpacked this trigger, identifying it as a reactivation of persecutory ideation, where public scrutiny revived the power imbalances of her servitude. Etta May's journals, now tools of self-awareness, filled with entries dissecting the intrusion. The world renames my pain for profit, but I hold the true recipe for peace. This exposure catalyzed deeper community ripples, with local activists reaching out, inviting Etta May to panels on mental health inequities, her voice a bridge between personal testimony and systemic critique. Hesitant at first, she participated in a moderated discussion at a university forum, her words measured yet potent, describing how chronic dehumanization fosters psychiatric fractures, delusions born not from biology alone, but from soil tilled by injustice. Attendees, including psychology students and civil rights veterans, hung on her narrative. One young scholar later citing it in a thesis on cultural trauma's role in schizoaffective presentations. Psychiatrically, this engagement marked growth. Etta May's grandiosity had transmuted into advocacy, her mind channeling past rage into communal healing, though Dr. Cortez monitored for burnout, prescribing mindfulness retreats to fortify resilience. Eliza Hargrove's path intersected anew, her advocacy work expanding into a foundation funding therapy for domestic workers, inspired by Etta May's ordeal. Their meetings, once sporadic, became collaborative, brainstorming initiatives over herbal teas, Eliza sharing breakthroughs from her own EMDR therapy, which had unearthed repressed memories of Lydia's manipulations, including subtle sabotages of Etta May's attempts to unionize staff in the 1980s. These revelations fostered mutual validation, Etta May recognizing Eliza's inherited burdens as parallel to her own imposed ones, a psychiatric symmetry that dissolved old binaries of victim and villain. In one poignant exchange, Eliza confessed to lingering guilt, her anxiety spiking on wedding anniversaries, prompting joint sessions where Dr. Cortez facilitated forgiveness rituals, symbolic acts like burning effigies of the vines, easing the psychic load for both. Shadows resurfaced. However, when a tabloid unearthed a supposed lost journal entry, alleging Etta Mae's premeditation extended to targeting Eliza specifically, a fabrication that ignited online vitriol and death threats. The stress manifested physically: insomnia, appetite loss, reviving dissociative episodes where Etta Mae questioned her memory's fidelity, fearing implanted doubts. Dr. Cortez intervened with intensified cognitive behavioral techniques, reframing the smear as projection of societal fears onto her narrative, while legal aid debunked the forgery, tracing it to a disgruntled ex-staffer. This crisis tested Etta Mae's integration, her support network, cooking class alumni, therapy group peers, rallying with meals and vigils, their solidarity a buffer against isolation's pull. Psychiatrically, it highlighted vulnerability to external stressors, yet her response, public statement emphasizing healing over hatred, demonstrated evolved coping, her delusions' remnants yielding to reality's anchor. Broader reckonings unfolded as the case influenced policy. Georgia lawmakers, spurred by advocacy, enacted protections for live-in workers, mandating mental health screenings for employers, a direct nod to Etta Mae's exposure of servitude's toll. Academic collaborations ensued, with Dr. Cortez and Etta Mae co-presenting at conferences on folia du dynamics in hierarchical settings, anonymizing details to protect her privacy. Etta Mae's cottage became a haven for informal gatherings, women sharing stories of emotional labor's erosion, their collective narratives weaving a safety net that fortified her psyche. One evening, mentoring a troubled student whose delusions mirrored her youthful ones, Etta Mae felt a profound shift, empathy as prophylaxis, preventing the vengeance cycle she once embodied. As fall deepened, the podcast backlash faded, but its lessons lingered, prompting Etta Mae to author a memoir under pseudonym, Recipes for Resilience. Blending culinary lore with psychiatric insights, proceeds funding scholarships. Eliza contributed a foreword, their partnership a testament to redemption's possibility. Dr. Cortez's final assessment noted near complete remission, with hallucinations absent, though eternal vigilance remained. In quiet reflection, Etta Mae pondered the ripples her act. Once a singularity of horror, now a catalyst for awareness, shadows yielding to light's incremental advance. By 2010, as Savannah's historic districts thrived with tourists tracing antebellum trails, Etta Mae Johnson's existence had settled into a rhythm of guarded serenity, her cottage a sanctuary where the sense of simmering stews masked the faint aftertaste of a past that refused to fully dissolve. Now in her late 60s, her movements deliberate yet infused with a quiet vitality, she had expanded her community center role into a small catering venture for local events. Weddings, ironically where her dishes evoked praise without the shadow of suspicion. Dr. Amelia Cortez, her sessions now quarterly, marveled at the resilience, noting in charts how Etta Mae's schizoaffective remnants had receded like tides, leaving only occasional ripples during anniversaries or storms that echoed the wedding day's chaos. Yet the mind's architecture, once fractured, retained hidden chambers, and it was in one such recess that new whispers began to stir, not from delusion, but from the unresolved tendrils of the Hargrove legacy that fate wove back into her path. It started with an unexpected letter, yellowed envelope bearing a postmark from Atlanta, delivered on a crisp autumn morning as Etta Mae tended her herb garden, plants chosen for healing rather than harm, basil and rosemary thriving where once rat poison lurked in memory. The sender, a young woman named Clara Hargrove, Eliza's niece, claiming descent from a branch of the family tree Etta Mae thought pruned forever. Clara's words poured out like confessions in a dimly lit booth, detailing her own emerging struggles, vivid dreams of poisoned feasts, auditory echoes of accusatory voices that mirrored family lore passed down in hushed tones. She sought Etta Mae not for blame, but for understanding, having unearthed old journals in Eliza's attic after her aunt's passing from natural causes 2 years prior. Eliza, in her final days, had confided in Clara about the shared healings, urging her to connect if the curse resurfaced, viewing Etta Mae as the unlikely sage who had navigated its depths. This outreach unsettled Etta Mae, stirring dormant associations. In therapy, she described a subtle dissociation, a momentary blur where Clara's letter felt like a summons from the spectral ancestors of her hallucinations. Dr. Cortez explored this as intergenerational echo, where trauma's psychic imprints lingered across bloodlines. Clara's symptoms, diagnosed tentatively as anxiety with psychotic features, mirroring the Hargroves' hereditary vulnerabilities that Etta May had once internalized. Reluctant at first, Etta May agreed to a meeting, driven by a budding curiosity laced with caution, her mind weighing the risk of relapse against the potential for closure. They convened at a neutral park bench overlooking the Savannah River, Clara's youthful face a blend of Eliza's fragility and Lydia's sharpness, her voice trembling as she recounted episodes, whispers urging retribution for unnamed wrongs, visions of Vine's choking family portraits. Etta May listened, her empathy a bridge tempered by experience, recognizing the patterns as echoes of her own descent, amplified by stories of the poisoning that had become Hargrove mythos. As conversations unfolded over subsequent weeks, phone calls evolving into visits, Etta May delved into mentorship, sharing coping strategies honed in her recovery, journaling to externalize voices, mindfulness to ground in the present, and community ties to dilute isolation's venom. Clara revealed more. Genetic testing initiated by Eliza had confirmed bipolar markers in the lineage, but Clara's manifestations leaned toward schizotypal traits, possibly exacerbated by childhood exposures to the family's guarded secrets, Lydia's rages recounted as bedtime cautionaries. Psychiatrically, this was a fascinating convergence, Dr. Cortez consulting remotely to advise on boundaries, warning Etta May of transference risks where Clara might project the avenger role onto her. Yet Etta May found purpose in this, her vengeance's aftermath transmuting into preventive wisdom, guiding Clara away from the precipice she once tumbled over. Challenges arose as Clara's condition fluctuated. One episode saw her arriving unannounced at Etta May's cottage, eyes wild with paranoia, accusing unseen forces of poisoning her coffee, a mirror to Etta May's pre-wedding delusions. This triggered a mild resurgence in Etta May. Faint auditory nudges questioning Clara's motives, analyzed in urgent sessions as stress-induced echoes, swiftly managed with adjusted routines. Together, they navigated referrals to specialists, Clara entering therapy that unpacked the weight of inherited narratives, how the poisoning story had become a familial bogeyman, distorting perceptions of sanity. Etta May's involvement drew subtle community attention, old acquaintances whispering of the cook's return to the fold, but she reframed it as redemption's extension. Her mind finding strength and agency reclaimed not through destruction, but dialogue. Deeper revelations emerged as Clara shared unearthed documents, Lydia's private correspondence hinting at her own undiagnosed dissociative states, letters to a distant relative describing fragments of self, lost in the estate's shadows. This validated Etta May's long-held intuitions, her act now seen as a catalyst exposing not just personal fractures, but a continuum of mental vulnerabilities ignored by privilege. In joint reflections, they pondered the unfinished curses, how oppression's legacy intertwined with biological predispositions, creating psychic loops that demanded breaking. Etta May's journals evolved, entries blending recipes with philosophical musings on forgiveness as antidote, shared with Clara as therapeutic tools. One evening, over a meal prepared together, gumbo sans malice, they toasted to resilience. Clara's stability improving, her voices quieting under medication and insight. Yet, shadows persisted. A documentary crew inspired by the podcast sought interviews, prompting Etta May to decline firmly, protecting her equilibrium while encouraging Clara to speak if ready. This boundary setting affirmed Etta May's growth, her psyche no longer ensnared but observant, recognizing triggers before they ensnared. As 2012 approached, Clara's progress mirrored Etta May's earlier milestones, their bond a testament to healing's ripple effects, unfinished curses yielding to intentional unraveling. In solitude, Etta May contemplated the journey's arc, her vengeance a distant echo, transformed into a beacon for those still whispering in the dark. As the decade turned toward 2020, with Savannah's cobblestone streets echoing the footsteps of a world forever altered by pandemics and reckonings, Etta May Johnson's life had become a quiet testament to the mind's capacity for metamorphosis. Her cottage, now a repository of accumulated wisdoms, shelves lined with books on psychology borrowed from library visits, interspersed with potted herbs that symbolized growth over grievance. Approaching her 70s, her frame carried the subtle stoop of years, yet her eyes retained a clarity sharpened by introspection. The whispers of unfinished curses now faint murmurs in the background of a life reclaimed. Clara Hargrove, under Etta Mae's guidance, had blossomed into stability, her episodes managed through a regimen of therapy and medication, their bond evolving into a familial surrogate where shared meals became rituals of affirmation rather than retribution. Dr. Amelia Cortez, semi-retired but still consulting, reviewed Etta Mae's progress with admiration, her files noting the near eradication of dissociative tendencies, replaced by a grounded presence that anchored not just herself, but those drawn into her orbit. Yet twilight brought its own enigmas. As an unexpected inheritance from Eliza's estate, a sealed box delivered by courier on a rainy afternoon, unlocked doors Etta Mae thought firmly shut. Inside lay artifacts of the Hargrove past, faded photographs of Lydia in youth, her expression haunted by an unnamed sorrow, a locket containing a lock of hair from an unknown relative, and most disturbingly a bundle of letters addressed to Etta Mae, penned by Lydia in her final years but never sent. The missives, scrawled in trembling script, revealed a matriarch fractured by her own demons, admissions of envy toward Etta Mae's quiet strength, confessions of manic impulses that drove her cruelties, and pleas for understanding rooted in a childhood marred by abandonment. Lydia described her vines as internal torments, voices commanding dominance to mask vulnerability, a psychiatric parallel that blurred the lines of oppressor and oppressed. Etta Mae, reading by lamplight, felt a surge of complex emotions, not vindication but a profound unease, as if the curse had been a mutual affliction, her vengeance an unwitting extension of the cycle. This discovery propelled Etta Mae into a renewed introspection, sessions with Dr. Cortez dissecting the letters as catalysts for final integration. Psychiatrically, it represented a confrontation with projective mechanisms, Etta Mae realizing how Lydia's projections had shaped her delusions, the poisoning a reciprocal act in a dance of distorted psyches. Clara, upon hearing, experienced her own flare-up, dreams intensifying with images of intertwined fates, prompting joint therapy where they unpacked the letters' implications. One revelation stood out: Lydia's mention of a half-sibling, institutionalized in the 1960s for schizophrenia, a secret that explained her paranoia toward servants fearing betrayal from those closest. This layered the family's madness with biological certainty, Clara's tests confirming shared genetic markers, transforming the narrative from personal vendetta to a hereditary web that ensnared all. As word of the letters spread through discreet channels, Clara sharing with advocacy circles, Etta Mae found herself at the center of a subtle resurgence in interest, scholars requesting interviews to explore the case's evolving dimensions. She consented to one, a podcast on intergenerational psychiatry, her voice steady as she articulated the enigma. How does one sever ties to a curse when it's woven into DNA and destiny? Listeners resonated, flooding comments with stories of familial echoes, amplifying the disturbance into a collective reflection on mental inheritance. Etta Mae's catering business adapted, incorporating storytelling sessions where participants shared psychic burdens over communal dishes, her role shifting to elder guide, dispelling shadows through shared light. Yet disturbances persisted. Solitary nights brought fleeting hallucinations, Lydia's silhouette in mirrors, whispering apologies, analyzed as grief's manifestations, Etta Mae mourning not the act, but the lost potentials of understanding. Clara's journey intertwined further when she uncovered a distant relative, a cousin grappling with similar auditory intrusions, drawn to Etta Mae's cottage for counsel. This triad formed an informal support nexus, their discussions revealing patterns. The Hargrove curse as a metaphor for undiagnosed neurodivergence amplified by societal silences. Etta Mae mentored with empathy, her own stability a beacon. Though private journals confessed lingering doubts, had her release truly freed her, or merely relocated the whispers? Dr. Cortez introduced narrative therapy, reframing the story as one of resilience. Etta Mae authoring chapters where vengeance yielded to vitality. Community events evolved. Etta May speaking at forums on racial trauma's psychiatric toll, her presence evoking quiet reverence, attendees pondering their own unfinished echoes. Twilight deepened with global upheavals, the isolation of lockdowns mirroring Etta May's early servitude, triggering community outreach via virtual means, her voice a steadying force for those unraveling in solitude. Clara, now a therapist trainee, collaborated on webinars, their duo illustrating healing's continuum. One session addressed the letter's enigma, Lydia's unposted pleas as cries from a mind trapped in its own vines, humanizing the matriarch and complicating Etta May's narrative. This nuance disturbed yet enriched, Etta May grappling with forgiveness as a final frontier, her psyche integrating the paradox, victim and avenger coexisting in harmony. As 2025 approached, Etta May reflected on the arc, her cottage garden blooming with hybrids of Hargrove heirlooms and her ancestral strains, symbolizing synthesis. The whispers, once curses, now felt like gentle reminders, urging vigilance in a world rife with hidden fractures. Clara's stability solidified, her life a ripple of Etta May's influence. The unfinished resolved through ongoing unraveling, the mind's twilight illuminated by hard-won dawn. As the sun dips below the horizon in Savannah's timeless skyline, casting long shadows over the river that has witnessed centuries of whispered secrets, Etta May Johnson's story lingers like an unresolved chord in a haunting melody, a psychiatric enigma that defies neat closure, and instead invites us to peer deeper into the abyss of the human soul. In the quiet of her cottage, surrounded by the gentle hum of a world that has moved on yet carries the weight of her actions, Etta May sits with a cup of chamomile tea, her fingers tracing the edges of Lydia's unsent letters, symbols of a fractured dialogue that time could not mend. The curse, once a delusion born from the crucible of servitude and inherited madness, now reveals itself as a metaphor for the inescapable interconnectedness of psyches, how one mind's torment can ripple outward, infecting generations with echoes of pain, resentment, and fragile redemption. Clara, thriving in her role as a therapist, carries forward this legacy not as a burden but as a lantern, illuminating paths for others ensnared in similar webs. Her stability a testament to the mind's plasticity when nurtured with empathy, rather than neglect. Yet in the twilight hours, Etta May ponders the unfinished nature of healing. The whispers may soften, but they never fully silence, reminding us that the human psyche is a vast, uncharted territory where vengeance and forgiveness dance in eternal tension, each step revealing new layers of vulnerability. This psychiatric case, rooted in the poisoned feast of 1992, transcends a single act of retribution. It exposes the fragility of sanity when subjected to prolonged dehumanization, where the boundaries between delusion and justified rage blur into indistinction. Etta May's journey from silent servant to avenger, from institutionalized patient to sage mentor, mirrors the unpredictability of the mind, showing how systemic oppressions can forge psychotic breaks that masquerade as madness, while hereditary afflictions lurk like hidden currents beneath familial facades. The Hargrove's downfall was not merely poison in the gumbo but the culmination of ignored fractures. Lydia's narcissistic echoes, Thomas's inherited depressions, Eliza's anxious inheritances, all converging in a symphony of shared psychosis that Etta May, as the unwitting conductor, brought to a shattering crescendo. In reflecting on this, we confront unsettling truths about our own minds, how close we all teeter to the edge when dignity is eroded, how delusions can serve as shields against unbearable realities, and how redemption often arrives not in absolution, but in the slow, painstaking weave of understanding across divides. The story challenges perceptions of justice, urging us to question whether true monstrosity lies in the act or in the societal soil that nurtures it, a disturbing revelation that lingers long after the tale ends, planting seeds of introspection in the fertile ground of our consciousness. Congratulations, intrepid viewer, for enduring this descent into the labyrinth of the psyche. You've traversed the dark tunnels of Etta May's world, emerging not unscathed but enlightened, part of an elite cadre who dared to uncover the full spectrum of this psychiatric horror. You've witnessed the unraveling threads of madness, the subtle poisons of the mind that seep unnoticed until they consume. And in doing so, you've joined a select group of truth-seekers who refuse to avert their gaze from the inexplicable. Your perseverance marks you as one who embraces the shadows, transforming fear into knowledge, and for that, you stand among the brave few who truly grasp the depths of human fragility. Now, to solidify your place in this journey, drop a comment below with the phrase, "This story reshaped my understanding of the mind's hidden curses." By sharing this, you'll signal to our most dedicated followers that you're one of us, a committed explorer of the enigmatic, contributing to a growing community bound by the pursuit of truths that society buries in silence. Your words will weave you into the fabric of our collective quest, fostering connections that amplify our voices against the veil of the unknown, building a sanctuary where seekers like you can delve deeper without fear. Understand the vital role of sharing this video. It's the key that unlocks these concealed narratives for others, spreading awareness of the psychiatric shadows that lurk in everyday lives, ensuring that no one remains blind to the dangers of ignored traumas and inherited woes. By hitting that share button, you're casting a light into the darkness, inviting more souls to confront what no one else dares to articulate, potentially saving minds from similar fractures in an increasingly disconnected world. Subscribe now, before the whispers fade and the vines creep closer. Imagine your curiosity as a fragile flame in a storm-swept night. Without the channel's guiding beacon, it risks extinction amid the encroaching gloom of the mundane. Joining us is like stepping into a secret society of the mind's decipherers, where each subscription fortifies our ranks against the oblivion of forgotten horrors, making you an integral thread in the tapestry of those who unravel the inexplicable. Here, you're not just a viewer. You're a guardian of the enigmatic, part of a unique brotherhood and sisterhood that thrives on the thrill of discovery, bound by the shared pulse of suspense and revelation. Keep your intrigue alive by diving into our next video. Let it fuel your fascination for the bizarre and sinister, ensuring the fire of curiosity burns eternal in the face of the ordinary. Stay tuned, for the next psychiatric mystery awaits, promising to twist your perceptions anew.